Our next panelist is Erin Roche. Erin Roche is a project research specialist at UVM Center for Rural Studies. Erin joined the Center for Rural Studies in 2008 to research issues related to rural community development, including food access, nutrition, transportation, and higher education. Prior to joining the Center for Rural Studies, Erin developed and implemented go-to-market plans for technology companies in Seattle and taught business planning and marketing in a small island nation. She and her partner and their 5-year-old son live in a 130-year-old house in a small town in Vermont. Please join me in welcoming Erin to the summit.
JP, I think your phone is up here. Thank you, everyone, for having me. Thank you, Bernice, for the lovely introduction. Am I talking into this? Okay, all right. Okay, I don't know about all of you. That's a tough act to follow, and my brain is a little bit full. So I invite you all to take kind of a deep breath. I'm going to take a deep breath. Make just a little bit more room up there. Okay. So I'm told that we're going to talk about how you can recognize success. And I'm told that not everyone finds data as entertaining as I do. So I thought I would do a brief dramatic interpretation before I get to the data. Okay. There are 4 roles, and I'm going to attempt to play all of them, so bear with me a little bit. So in 2009, shortly after I started working at the Center for Rural Studies, I was part of a meeting with a team. There were 4 of us all together in the meeting. And we had just been offered a small piece of a much larger grant to do farm-to-school programming. And our piece was to evaluate farm-to-school programming in Vermont. And so this is my interpretation of how that meeting went. What should we measure? Well, as a nutrition expert, the most important thing to me is our kids eating better. So let's measure fruit and vegetable consumption. Well, as an economist, I really want to understand how these efforts change buying patterns, especially of local foods. Are all local foods healthy foods, though? Should we just measure healthy foods? Let's measure what was purchased overall, and then we can look at healthy foods and local foods. What about if they had a garden and grew some of the food themselves? How would we account for that? And what if we measured it in pounds and not dollars, so we could account for free food? And what if the garden meant that they bought less from local farms? How are we going to account for that? What if the kids don't eat it and they throw it away? Then it doesn't matter what we count, dollars or pounds. Shouldn't we look at consumption? But not all kids eat school meals. And even if they do, it's only a small part of their whole diet. How will we know what they're eating outside of school? Consumption won't change if they don't learn something, and schools need to show progress in educational goals. Common Core standards are coming and all of that. Isn't it important to tie the measure to what the school's educational goals are? If the kids learn about healthy local food and taste it in the cafeteria, what's the program's impact if they can't get it at home? What if their parents won't shop at the farmer's market? What if they can't afford to buy fresh food? And the National School Lunch Program from the USDA is actually fairly prescriptive in the number of servings of fruits and vegetables. So how much can we expect consumption to change anyway? Wouldn't the change have to come at a national policy level? This was really, seriously, in a 1-hour meeting. I was exhausted. I wasn't the one asking the questions. I was the one writing the notes, as you might be able to tell. And in hindsight, I think we unearthed some really important threads in this meeting that we continue 5 years later to be challenged by. One is that there is more than one way to recognize success. So you might think maybe I've answered the question and we can all go home, but no, I'm going to talk some more. Number 2, the goals and priorities of the program actually contributes to the definition of success. What's the goal of the program? What's it trying to do? That's going to help us know when we've been successful. Number 3 is that effective programming is often complex in its web of who is impacted and how, and I think we've heard a lot about that over the last couple of days. So that's number 3. Number 4 is that grassroots programming may succeed as a result of its inconsistencies, not in spite of its inconsistencies. So those are kind of my 4 threads for this presentation. So grassroots food system programming, such as farm-to-school programming, and I'm going to talk about farm-to-school programming, but I mean that in the most inclusive and encompassing way that I possibly could. But it's just sort of a shorthand for talking about certain types of programs. They may be successful because they can be implemented in a way that makes the best use of a community's resources and understands its needs. And while this was a conversation from 5 years ago about a very specific project, we've faced these same challenges in evaluating local purchasing of fresh fruits and vegetables as part of a program here in Vermont, a national school garden curriculum, ongoing efforts to evaluate Vermont's farm-to-school grant programs and efforts. And more recently, I've been involved on a national scale working with the National Farm-to-School Network and helping them as they develop an evaluation framework for evaluating success in farm-to-school, and also working with the USDA and evaluating their nationwide farm-to-school grant program. So what I've tried to do for today is I'm going to talk about some definitions, I'm going to share some models, I'm going to share some bits of data that we've collected over the last 5 years. I'm going to try to make them seem coherent. But just to be clear, these were all done at specific moments in time, and this is the first time, for me anyway, that it even feels coherent. So this is kind of exciting. So I want to start with some definitions. So now I'm going to move the slides ahead. Okay, farm-to-school programming. The first one is my definition, which is a grassroots approach to creating system-wide change. I'm not sure I could be more vague, but maybe if I tried. Okay, the next 2 definitions are both from national organizations. And you'll notice that they use remarkably similar words in their definitions. I don't know anything about where these definitions came from or who wrote them, but they're very similar sounding. That farm-to-school enriches the connection communities have with local healthy food and food producers, and that comes from the National Farm-to-School Network. And the USDA similarly says that farm-to-school programming will enrich children's bodies and minds while supporting local economies. And then to take it a little closer to home, another definition, which is not so very different, is to cultivate healthy farm and food connections in classrooms, cafeterias, and communities. I took this from Food Connects Vermont. I think that there are other organizations that do farm to school in Vermont that would agree that that is a definition that we use here. So the definitions look fairly similar, but fairly vague too, I would say. Looking at the USDA program and the National Farm to School Network, when I combine them together, there are 6 areas of impact that farm-to-school programming could address, ranging from nutrition and public health to market opportunities and community development to education and the environment. I don't want to say it thinks it can be all things to all people, but that's a lot of impact. And then lastly, something to consider is the level of impact that it has, or what, as a researcher, I might call the unit of analysis. Beth was talking earlier about understanding the level that something is at, and I think as Bernice was introducing us, she was talking about it as well. Individual levels, school levels, community levels, and policy levels. Farm-to-school programming in different places at different times operates at all these different levels. So it can be all these things. It can be any one of these things. And I also want to give some examples of the specific things that farm-to-school programming does. The definitions are similar, so are the programs the same? Here's my obligatory Venn diagram. I don't know if you can see these all that well, but some farm-to-school programs provide local food for kids at school. I'd say a lot of them do, but certainly not all of them. Some of them provide school gardens. Some of them provide school gardens as part of the curriculum. Some of them as an after-school program. Some of them include taste tests. Some of them have field trips. And then as I move out the circle, some of them have compost programs, and some schools have compost programs. Some offer community events to parents and others in the community. Some encourage parent engagement and environmental education. And then it gets even bigger, and I could probably keep going. There's nutrition education, there's food service professional development, there's purchase agreements with local farms. You might notice, if you think about it, when I mentioned there are 6 areas of impact, like nutrition, that nutrition education is up there. So certainly we've got that area of impact covered. School composting and environmental education. We've got the environment and the education part covered in there. Let's see, public health and nutrition. We've got school gardens. We've got local food. We've got taste tests. And then we're thinking about community development and market opportunities. We've got food service professional development. We've got local food and purchasing agreements with local farms. Different programs have activities that could be aimed at any of these impacts. This makes measuring success a little bit complicated, because when I said earlier about knowing what the goal is going to dictate whether we know whether it's successful, it's kind of hard to know what the goal is when you just see a list of activities like this. It's really important to understand what the goal is to be able to figure out what to do. So being researchers, we didn't really know what to make of this. So as this has evolved over 5 years, we've started applying models, because I feel like that's what researchers do. We apply models, or part of what we do. So Bernice, I think you mentioned the social ecological model, and so here it is in blue and white. It's widely adopted by the CDC as a way to understand impacts that programs can have and to think about how we might best affect behavior and population level change. And I'm going to talk much faster now. Thank you. So that model informs our work. A lot of the data that we collect is at an individual level. A lot of the programs are done at a school level. It's sort of a fundamental disconnect. And then there's things happening at a policy level. So there's individual behavior change. This is the model that we use to inform that data collection. And now I'm going to just share a couple of snippets of data with you. Individual behavior change. We did a survey with 3rd through 5th graders back in 2009, and we asked them how much fruits and vegetables they ate. And overall, the kids that had high scores for the things that we said were important had higher, were much more likely, had higher percentage of them said, I eat as much as I'm supposed to eat of fruits and vegetables. So that's really awesome, and we all patted ourselves on the back because Farm to School was working, and that's really super. But can we really believe what the kids tell us? So in my personal experience, which I hadn't experienced at the time that this data was collected, but I now have personally experienced, when you ask a kid, what did you have for lunch today? He might just say, they gave us bowls of sugar. I know they didn't give him bowls of sugar, but yet that's what he told me. So anyway, we kind of went, well, maybe this isn't the best way to measure whether we're succeeding. So we tried it a different way, and we asked them about knowledge, and we asked them about intent. This was in a different study, and it was in 2012, but we saw the same sort of results where the kids that scored higher on these constructs from the social cognitive framework were more likely to be knowledgeable and have good intentions to eat than the kids who had lower scores. So anyway. What's really exciting is to look at the data, I think, on a school level. And so we've started collecting some school level data. We've asked schools, all the public schools in Vermont, about, do you have these elements of farm to school programming? Which ones do you have and how many? So all these activities that I showed you on the bubble slide, there were 15 of them on this survey. And you can see that the most often mentioned number of activities at schools in Vermont are 12 out of 15. We're pretty proud of that. But you'll also notice that there are a few people who said 0, and there's one person who said 1, and we're not so proud of that. But it's important to note we don't really know what that means, though. Is 12 successful? Is 14 successful? Is 10? I'm not really sure. And so it's important to figure that out. Another study that I thought I would share a little bit of data from, again, at a school level, is we worked with schools through food hubs on trying to increase local purchasing by the schools. We looked at their spending on local foods in 2012 in a 2-month period, and then again in 2013. And for the schools that participated, there was a 58% increase for the same period from 2012 to 2013. That sounds like success. That's really cool. And we have 2 periods of time and all of that. But we don't really know what this means in terms, maybe they were purchasing more food anyway. So maybe it is success, maybe it isn't. But that's one way to measure success anyway. We have also seen policy level change in the same time frame in these 5 years that I've been doing this work. And I'm not going to get into too much detail about them, but the USDA created its own farm-to-school program, and it's given out 139 grants in 2 years and $5 million each year, 10 million total. It's working on the third round now, so that's exciting. They've started doing their own farm-to-school census nationwide. Also exciting, and you can see some of the data up there. And like I said earlier, the National Farm-to-School Network is creating an evaluation framework, which I feel like will be really helpful in recognizing success. So what I really wanted to get time to talk about is what I feel like are the next steps and where do we go from here, because we have these bits and pieces, we have these indicators. I feel like each of these projects and methods has attempted to measure a really specific and prescribed aspect within a very narrow time frame, usually one single school year, of the impact of farm to school. But farm to school is complicated, just like the food system is complicated. There's multiple players and beneficiaries, and its impact isn't limited to just the time frame in which it's delivered. Its impact might be felt for years beyond when it's delivered. And further, this kind of big behavior change that we're talking about requires multiple and ongoing treatments. And so we really hope that a school doesn't just adopt farm to school for a single year, that it keeps doing it year after year after year. So if we just measure it 1 year, then do we really know about success? So what I see as the two necessary next steps as far as research and understanding success are, one is that the grassroots approach is really crucial for communities to be able to do what they need to do and use the resources that they have, but it makes it really hard to measure. We need to find consistent measures that can work within that grassroots approach. We shouldn't try to change that grassroots nature. And number two is that we really need to study this over time, and that I feel like is the most important thing. We need to be able to compare it, and we need to be able to see how it changes over time. And that is the end of my whirlwind presentation of 5 years of data. Thank you. And these are some of the fabulous people that contributed to the research.